He was the last brother, the survivor of America's most tragic political dynasty. Edward Ted Kennedy, the Lion of the Senate, lived a life marked by ambition, scandal, redemption, and an unshakable commitment to public service. While his brothers John and Robert became martyrs, Ted became something different. The enduring force who carried the Kennedy mission through 5 decades of American history, refusing to let grief silence the family's voice. But behind the Senate speeches, behind the mythology of the last Kennedy, was a father, flawed, loving, determined, and haunted. Ted Kennedy raised 3 children who grew up not only in the long shadow of their father, but in the longer shadow of the brothers he lost. Curran, Ted Jr., and Patrick Kennedy each carried the burden of legacy in their own way, shaped by privilege but also by the tragic cost of being a Kennedy. Their lives became a reflection of their father's journey. Courage carved out of suffering, purpose born from heartbreak, identity forged in the fire of expectation. Tonight, we step beyond the legend of Ted Kennedy to explore the private story of the man he was and the 3 children who inherited not only his name, but his unrelenting fight to make meaning out of pain. Number 3. Patrick Joseph Kennedy II. Patrick Joseph Kennedy II, born on July 14, 1967, was Ted Kennedy's youngest child, and the one whose life most visibly mirrored the Kennedy family's defining battles. Ambition, addiction, illness, reinvention, and the relentless drive to turn suffering into service. From the moment he was born, Patrick was surrounded by expectation. He carried the name of generations of Kennedys, including his great-grandfather, the original Patrick Kennedy, who arrived in America as an Irish immigrant with nothing but hope in his hands. Growing up in the Kennedy household meant living inside a storm of legacy. Patrick's uncles had been assassinated. His father was a pillar of U.S. politics. Every dinner table conversation felt like a debate between history and responsibility. Patrick loved his father with a deep, almost aching intensity, but he also felt the profound pressure of being the last political son. And behind closed doors, he struggled. From adolescence, Patrick battled depression, anxiety, and addiction, demons that had quietly haunted generations of Kennedys but were rarely spoken aloud. While Ted Kennedy fought legislative wars in Washington, Patrick fought private wars inside himself. Yet even in his darkest moments, he inherited one essential part of the Kennedy DNA. He refused to surrender. At just 21 years old, he was elected to the Rhode Island House of Representatives, becoming one of the youngest lawmakers in the state's history. 4 years later, he won a seat in the U.S. Congress, the 4th Kennedy to serve on Capitol Hill. For 16 years, Congressman Patrick Kennedy became a fierce advocate in areas overlooked by most politicians: mental health parity, addiction recovery, health care access, and research into neurological disorders. He co-authored the landmark Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act of 2008, a transformative law that forced insurance companies to treat mental illness the same way they treat physical conditions. Few bills in modern American history have had such life-changing consequences, and it was driven by the suffering Patrick experienced in silence. But even as he fought for millions of Americans, Patrick was still fighting himself. His struggle with addiction played out publicly, including a highly publicized car accident near Capitol Hill in 2006, during which he sought treatment immediately after. Patrick's willingness to confront his own failures openly shocked many in Washington. But it also made him one of the most honest and relatable members of the Kennedy dynasty. In 2010, he left Congress to focus on recovery, family, and what would become his life's mission. He founded the Kennedy Forum and became one of the most influential mental health activists in the United States. His best-selling memoir, A Common Struggle, broke generational silence by exposing the hidden battles inside America's most famous family and inside millions of American households. Today, Patrick Kennedy is a husband, father, and one of the leading voices calling for a revolution in mental health care. He has transformed vulnerability into strength, shame into advocacy, and pain into policy. Among Ted Kennedy's 3 children, Patrick is the warrior of the unseen world, the son who inherited his father's political fire, but turned it toward the quiet crises that shape human lives. Number 2. Edward Moore Kennedy Jr., Ted Kennedy Jr. Edward Moore Kennedy Jr., born on September 26, 1961, was Ted Kennedy's middle child, and the one whose life story became a testament to resilience, reinvention, and the unbreakable determination that defines the Kennedy name. While Patrick's battles were internal and psychological, Ted Jr.'s were physical, visible, and brutally life-altering. Yet through adversity, he emerged as one of the strongest moral voices of his generation. Ted Jr. was just 12 years old when tragedy struck him in a deeply personal way. In 1973, he was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, a rare and aggressive form of bone cancer. His left leg was amputated above the knee, a devastating experience for any child, but especially for a boy growing up in a family where competition, sports, and physical vitality were the currency of daily life. For Ted Kennedy Sr., who had already buried 2 brothers and lived through the family's relentless cycle of loss, watching his son fight cancer was a wound almost too painful to endure. But it was Ted Jr.'s response that defined him. Instead of succumbing to despair, he displayed extraordinary grit. Within months of surgery, he learned to walk again on a prosthetic leg. Within years, he learned to ski, to run, and to reclaim his independence with a quiet ferocity that inspired his entire family. This experience shaped the core of Ted Jr.'s identity, not as a victim, not as a Kennedy heir, but as a fighter. His early trauma also shaped his life's work. Ted Jr. became a civil rights attorney, specializing in disability rights. He dedicated his career to ensuring that people with disabilities, people like him, could live with dignity, equality, and opportunity. He fought employers, institutions, and governments to enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, becoming one of the nation's leading advocates for disability justice. While Patrick entered politics and Christopher became a business leader, Ted Jr.'s impact unfolded in the courtroom and in legislation that transformed millions of lives. In 2014, he was elected to the Connecticut State Senate, continuing the Kennedy tradition of public service. But with his own focus, healthcare access, disability equity, and environmental protection. Unlike many Kennedys, Ted Jr. lives with remarkable emotional steadiness. His marriage to Kiki Gershman Kennedy and the raising of their 2 children gave him a grounded, stable family life, something rare within the Kennedy dynasty. People close to him say Ted Jr. inherited the gentlest parts of his father. The humility, the patience, the ability to listen, and the belief that public service is not about spotlight, but about people. Ted Jr. is the embodiment of quiet heroism, the son who lived through pain and emerged stronger, who lost a limb but gained a mission, who used his Kennedy platform not for ambition, but for justice. Among Ted Kennedy's children, he is the survivor, the one who turned physical loss into moral purpose, proving that courage is not the absence of hardship, but the strength to rise from it. Number 1. Cara Ann Kennedy. Cara Ann Kennedy, born on February 27, 1960, was Ted Kennedy's first child, the eldest daughter in a family defined by immense love, immense tragedy, and an almost impossible legacy. From the moment she entered the world, Cara carried the combination of warmth, sensitivity, and moral instinct that defined her father. She was the child who felt everything deeply, who loved fiercely, and who often became the emotional heart of the Kennedy household. Growing up, Kara witnessed the full spectrum of the Kennedy story. The laughter, the chaos, the fierce debates, the political glory, and the devastating losses. She was 8 years old when her uncle Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. She was 3 when President John F. Kennedy was killed. Her childhood was shadowed by funerals, headlines, and the constant awareness that the world watched her family with awe and expectation. But unlike many Kennedys who grew up drawn toward competition and public spotlight, Kara was the quiet flame, artistic, perceptive, and profoundly empathetic. She gravitated toward film and storytelling and eventually built a career in television production, working for Fox News, NBC, and the Tribune Broadcasting Company. She had her father's sense of justice, but her own way of expressing it, through media, narrative, and the human stories behind the political surface. Then, at age 42, Kara faced the most frightening battle of her life. In 2002, she was diagnosed with lung cancer, despite never having smoked. Doctors warned her that the treatment would be difficult, the outcome uncertain. Ted Kennedy, who had already buried too many family members, was devastated. But Kara fought with the same tenacity that defined her father's career. She underwent surgery, survived, and rebuilt her physical strength with relentless discipline. After beating cancer, she became a passionate advocate for cancer awareness and patient support. But tragedy was never far from the Kennedy orbit. Kara's relationship with her father was incredibly close. She accompanied him to events, supported his political causes, and stood beside him through controversies and crises. When Ted Kennedy died in 2009, the emotional toll on Kara was profound. Many who knew her said she never fully recovered from losing him. On September 16, 2011, just 2 years after her father's passing, Kara suffered a massive heart attack while exercising at a Washington, D.C. gym. She was only 51 years old. Her sudden death shocked the Kennedy family and the nation, cutting short the life of a woman known for her quiet strength and her fierce love for her family. Kara left behind her husband, Michael Allen, and their son, Max, as well as a legacy built not on political power, but on resilience, creativity, and the courage to keep moving forward, even when history seemed determined to break her. Among Ted Kennedy's children, Kara is the heart, the daughter who lived with grace through the heaviest shadows, who fought her battles in silence, and whose life embodies both the fragility and the indomitable hope that define the Kennedy spirit. The story of Ted Kennedy and his 3 children is not merely a chapter in the Kennedy saga. It is a portrait of endurance, transformation, and the complicated inheritance of a family shaped by both greatness and grief. Ted Kennedy, the last brother, carried the weight of a dynasty built on brilliance and shattered by tragedy. For 50 years he stood in the Senate as its lion, roaring not for power, but for the vulnerable, the forgotten, the working families who had no voice. Yet the greatest measure of his life was not written in legislation, but in the 3 children who carried his values into the world in their own profoundly different ways. Patrick Kennedy, the youngest, fought the invisible battles his father never fully understood. He wrestled with addiction, depression, and the expectations of a nation that saw the Kennedy legacy as flawless. But Patrick did something remarkable. He turned his wounds into weapons for justice. He became the leading voice for mental health equality in America, transforming private pain into public progress. His courage redefined what it means to be strong in a family long defined by stoicism. Ted Kennedy Jr., the survivor among survivors, lost his leg at 12 and gained a mission that would shape his entire life. He became the nation's most prominent disability rights advocate, proving that adversity can be transformed into empathy, and empathy into action. His work changed law, policy, and countless lives. Ted Jr. carried his father's kindness, his steadiness, and his unwavering belief that every human being deserves dignity. Kara Kennedy, the eldest, was the quiet soul of the family, the daughter who felt the deepest wounds and loved the strongest. She lived her life behind the camera, telling stories instead of becoming one. She survived cancer, supported her father through countless storms, and embodied the emotional resilience that held the Kennedys together, even as tragedy returned again and again. Her death at 51 left a silence that still echoes through the family. Together, these three children reflect the full spectrum of what it means to be a Kennedy. The triumph, the struggle, the responsibility, the humanity. And at the center of their journey stands Ted Kennedy, a father who was flawed, powerful, loving, wounded, and ultimately redeemed by the children he raised. His legacy is not only the laws he passed, but the lives he shaped. Three individuals who turned pain into purpose, inherited legacy without letting it consume them, and carried the Kennedy fire into a new century with humility and conviction. The story ends where all great legacies do, not in the halls of power, but within the hearts of those who continue the work. Ted Kennedy's children are the living proof that even in a family defined by history, it is courage, compassion, and perseverance that truly endure.